Hello, everyone. I think we are ready to start our webinar for today. I'm Bella. I'm an events manager at the Memorial Art Gallery, and I work to put together events like this webinar for you today. So thank you all for joining us. This is our first member-exclusive art history webinar, and we're very excited to be able to share this content with you today. Topic, and it's thanks to your support through your membership that we're able to do events like this. So thank you so much for being our members, even in these uncertain times. Just a couple of things that I'd like to mention before we start our lecture today. Our lecture will run for about 30 minutes, and after, Sydney Greaves, our presenter, will be answering questions. You can submit your questions through our Q&A function, and we will answer them after she's done presenting. We also have a couple of fun poll questions that we'll be sending to you to keep you engaged during our webinar. It's not a test, it's just for fun. So just prepare yourselves for those questions. And after our webinar ends today, we will be sending out a short survey to hear back from you, just to get some feedback about today's experience and what you'd like to see in the future. We also have a live captioner today, so this is just something to be aware of. So now I'm pleased to introduce our lecturer today, Sydney Greaves. She is one of our Estelle B. Goldman Assistant Curators of Academic Programs, and she has done it all at MAG. She's been at MAG for over 20 years, and she's done all kinds of things from being the lead educator on major permanent collection reinstallations to docent training, classroom outreach programming, and so much more. On top of that, she's an art historian and she specializes in ancient Mediterranean studies. She received her BA from the University of Nebraska and her master's from Boston University. And in addition to all of that, she's an expert in K-12 social studies curriculum development. All right, Sydney, I'm gonna pass the mic to you and let's take it away.
Thanks very much, Bella, and welcome to all of you out there. I can't see any of you, but you can see me. And I want to thank you for coming today. And I'm really grateful at this chance to reach out to our members, bring a little bit of MAG from a distance in this time that we're all sharing of social distancing. I called this talk today, Staying at Home, Getting Away. For a very particular reason. Staying home is obviously what we're doing now. Getting away is maybe what we want to do in the near future. I know I would. But with art, we can get away. We can travel anywhere in time and place that we want to through art. And we're going to do a little bit of traveling today through the eyes, the brushwork, the skills of a few artists whose works we are very fortunate to have in the Memorial Art Gallery collection. We're not going to travel just randomly anywhere. It's not a vacation necessarily. We're going through time and place with these artists to some of the places they called home, the places that they loved, in honor of the homes that we are all in today. So with that, I'm going to turn off my camera over here on the side, and we are going to travel. If I can get this to work, there we go. And I'm going to use a laser pointer for pointing out things I want you to do. Okay, we're going to start here with just a little bit of art history, nothing too heavy. It was in Dutch art of the 17th century that we have the very beginnings of landscape painting as an art form in its own right. Images of windmills and canals and churches, recognizable views and landmarks that celebrated the Dutch pride in their hard-won lands reclaimed from the sea. Likewise, seascapes and harbor scenes showed pride in the Dutch preeminence in international shipping, the wealth of trade goods and their superb harbors. Jan van de Kapel's image here, Dutch, a view off the Dutch coast, is a working harbor scene, typical example from this period in art history, and of course, here in our collection at MAG. We aren't able to identify the exact place that Jan van de Kapel has depicted here. In fact, it may not be a specific place. It may be more of kind of a generic view of a typical harbor town. However, this idea, the imagery would have been instantly familiar. And that was the appeal of scenes like this for the up-and-coming members of the merchant middle class. While the interest in depictions of familiar landscape scenes like this began as subject matter for artists' commissions, it didn't stop there. Artists turned to their own surroundings for their own purposes, their own home places as personal sources of inspiration. Another seascape here, another scene of boats and harbors and related everyday activities in our beloved Claude Monet towing a boat en fleur. While Monet was born in the city of Paris, he and his family moved up the River Seine to Le Havre on the northern Normandy coast before he turned 5. And it was here and across the river on the beaches at Honfleur that the teenage Monet was encouraged to try oil painting plein air for the first time, oil painting in the open air. Our painting dates from 1864. Monet was not yet 24 years old, but it already reflects that conjunction of contemporary setting, atmospheric light conditions, and experimental vision that we recognize today as the hallmarks of Impressionism. So many of Monet's famous paintings, focused on his own homes. We think of the views of his house and gardens at Argenteuil and his astounding gardens at Giverny from his later life. But it all started here in Honfleur. The setting along the river has changed so much in 150 years. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this poll because I think we've got it. There we go. There we go. The setting along the river has changed so much in 150 years. The lighthouse that we see here in the distance in Monet's painting still stands today. Here it is located, decommissioned, bereft of its lantern, standing over a half-mile inland due to the silting up of the river mouth, which altered the shoreline. And you see it here in this aerial view, and this kind of reflects the shoreline. Monet's fishermen were down here someplace, down here south along the River Seine. Like so many artworks, Monet's painting captures not only the momentary appearance of quickly changing light conditions, but records a place forever altered by time. Come on. I'm having trouble changing my slides. There we go. Jacob Maris, with his, along with his brothers, began what has come to be known as the Hague School of Painters, who were active in the last quarter of the 19th century. Although his early training took Maris to Antwerp and Paris, and he later traveled through Germany, Switzerland, and France, Maris returned again and again to his home in The Hague. As with the earlier Dutch coastal scene we saw by Van de Kapel, the exact location of Maris's harbor town is unknown. But by the date of this painting, 1875, Maris was back in The Hague, where his talent as a landscape artist flourished. This scene that he painted here includes all the Netherlandish hallmarks, almost as familiar to us today, as well as it was to Maris and his residents at the time. The windmill that we see here in this antique postcard and still today, the lift bridge, the vertical lift bridge here that appears front and center in Maris's painting. The boat-filled waterway could easily represent so many of the small harbor towns in the region of his home. And I point out over here, if you're a geographer interested in where we are in space, I've got a little map over here in each corner. Periodically, from 1870 to 1885, Paul Cézanne stayed in L'Estaque, which was a small fishing village near Marseille, where his mother, rented a house as a summer retreat for the family. Cézanne found great inspiration at Gloucester in the simple shapes and contrasting colors of water and the red-tiled roofs, of the ever-changing light and the seasons. His evident enchantment resulted in about 20 different versions of the views from the house, and we are fortunate to have one of these at MAG today. Gloucester sits along the coast just northwest of Marseille, 18 miles away from the city, along the coastline here off the Gulf of Marseille, which is the waterway here, and the waterway that you see here. The elements that so inspired Cézanne then are in many ways unchanged since his residence there. He began working plein air, Impressionist style, with the encouragement of Camille Pissarro only a few years before he painted our view of Gloucester. In Cézanne's own words to Pissarro, in an 1876 letter, we can see what he saw. I believe this area would suit you marvelously. It is like a playing card, red roofs over the blue sea. The sun is so terrific here that it seems to me as if the objects were silhouetted not only in black and white, but in blue, red, brown, and violet. The influences of Impressionism are also evident in William Merritt Chase's A Summer Day, which features his three daughters here playing in the shimmering sunshine at the family's summer home near Southampton, which is on the south shore of Long Island. Already well established as a painter and a teacher in New York City by this time, Chase arrived on Long Island in 1891 to direct the newly established Shinnecock Hills Summer School of Art, the first art school in the United States to teach plein air landscape painting Impressionist style. Chase brought his wife and growing family along for 12 summers at Shinnecock Hills, housing them in a rambling residence that you see here, built in 1892 by Stanford White of McKean, Mead, and White, the same architects responsible for MAG's 1913 building. The Chase house was on the outskirts of an art village, consisting of an assortment of cottages built by nearby property owners. The students assembled for a mass studio critique on Mondays in the studio building here, and then spent the rest of the week working with Chase, instructing while painting alongside them on Tuesdays. About 1,000 students, men and women alike, attended this school until it closed down in 1902. By 1884, Winslow Homer was in New York City and established as a pillar of American art. That year, he moved away to his family's summer home in Prouts Neck, Maine, hiring an architect out of nearby Portland to convert the carriage house into a year-round residence and studio for himself. In this painting, one of MAG's jewels, we're walking along the coastline with him as they loom out of the fog, silhouetted against the shrouded sky, the house and the studio. Okay, I'm gonna get rid of that for the moment because I need to change slides. There we go. If that poll wants to come back up, I don't know if that's possible to do now, sorry. For the next 26 years, Homer stayed almost full-time at Prouts Neck, inspired by the dramatic rocky coastline and the changeable weather conditions. The Portland architect who he hired to begin with, John Calvin Stevens, returned to the Homer compound for further work on Homer's studio, which you see right here, as well as a rental cottage. And in lieu of payment for this work, he requested a painting. And it was this painting, our painting, completed by Homer 7 years earlier and hanging in his studio since that time, that the surprised and pleased artist offered to the architect. it was a poetic choice. Homer was very proud of this painting and valued the architect's work on his studio where he produced the painting and in which it is featured. Here is the studio here and here in this photograph and in contemporary photographs. The painting stayed in the architect John Calvin Stevens' possession until his own death in 1940, after which it entered Mag's collection, where we see it today. I point out this photograph was taken in 1884 by a camera that Homer owned, taken by himself. So we really get a sense of the exact layout of the land here captured in our painting. It's rather poetic choice there too. Like William Merritt Chase, who we met a few moments ago, John Twachtman embraced the Impressionist style and used it to capture images of his own personal surroundings, particularly views of his family's home in Greenwich, Connecticut. This small white painted footbridge with a fabric awning, which you see here, this is actually fabric, was built by Twachtman himself over the brook that crossed the family property. The bridge is believed to not only have served as a subject for paintings, like it is here, but as an outdoor studio space for Twachtman to observe the effects of sunlight, shade, and water that the Impressionists so loved. He is thought to have sat here in this shaded spot under the awning to capture views of the water. John Twachtman was first drawn to southwestern Connecticut in 1886 by a good friend and fellow artist, J. Alden Weir, whose work is also in Mag's collection. By 1889, the Twachtman family had purchased a 17-acre farm on Round Hill Road in Greenwich. By 1892, Twachtman and Weir, along with other American Impressionist painters, formed the Cos Cob Art Colony at the Holly House in Greenwich, which you see here, the house at around that time, offering summer art classes for students of New York's Art Students League. Twachtman spent 12 years in Greenwich, teaching classes at Cos Cob, expanding the family home, which you see here in a photograph from just about that time, and painting views of the house and surrounding landscape. Horseneck Brook, which is crossed here by the bridge, is in this view here, not on the property, but on a nearby property. And another view of the Twachtman house and this covered porch, featured in so many other views by John Twachtman. You can look them up online and you will see really recognizable views of this house. William Blackens experienced the French Impressionists and the artists of the Fauvist movement, like Matisse, of the late 19th century firsthand in his travels, gathering artworks for the Armory Show, that blockbuster 1913 international exhibition that introduced American art audiences to modern art for the first time. Following his hard work for the Armory Show, Blackens returned to painting. This work, Beach at Blue Point, depicts a scene of summer leisure time, which was a favorite subject of Blackens at this time. The loose brushwork and the bright colors really distance himself from his former fellow American realists who favored the darker, more gritty social justice themes in art. Blackens and his family spent the summers of 1911 through 1916 on the south shore of Long Island. Blue Point, like many communities in the region, including nearby Bellport and Brookhaven, where the Blackens also stayed, all benefited from the extension of the Long Island Railroad and expanded automobile access to these leisure areas outside of New York City. Large shoreline hotels, such as Avery's 5 Mile Look here in Blue Point, seen here in a couple of different postcards, as well as featuring in Blackens' own painting, all catered to these seasonal visitors. 105 years later, many of these large hotels, including the 5 Mile Look, no longer survive, and the fashions may have changed just slightly for beachgoers now, But the saturated colors, the sun-drenched sand, and the appeal of the beach vacation still speak across the decades. The 1913 Armory Show had an equally profound effect on young Stuart Davis, who discovered abstraction there in the works of European modernists. Shortly after this, Davis's summer vacation took him to the working seaport town of Gloucester, Massachusetts, at the invitation of fellow artist and teacher John Sloan. These two influences, Gloucester, Massachusetts, and European abstraction, come together in another mag favorite that you see here, Landscape with Garage Lights. By the time that he painted this work, Stuart Davis had developed his own unique style, which utilized the simple, flattened forms of cubism, high contrast colors that are inspired by observation, and dynamic patterns which simultaneously break up and unite the composition. The colorful warehouses, ships, docks, and gas pumps depicted in Landscape with Garage Lights overlap and jostle for space. They recreate the steep, narrow streets and close-set buildings of the old town perched on the rocky New England coastline. Years later, Davis would submit a list of things that have made me want to paint, in his words. And included on that list was the landscape and boats of Gloucester, Mass. This artwork has, to my knowledge, never actually been exhibited at MAG. In fact, the artist was unknown to me until I began looking into this topic that we're exploring today, and I sort of stumbled on it, and I was really intrigued, not only by the artist, but by the choice of materials. Notice, egg tempera. The artist is Peter Hurd. He was a New Mexico resident and native, born in Roswell, which is actually only 50 miles east of San Patricio, the location depicted here. The arid New Mexico landscape of scrub plains, barren hills, and endless blue skies, here reflected in the waters of the Hondo River, drew Hurd to art from an early age. Following military school, an appointment to West Point took him to the East Coast, but only 2 years later, he left West Point to study art at the Pennsylvania Academy in Philadelphia, and then sought out the artist N.C. Wyeth at his home near Philadelphia and became a student alongside the Wyeth children. Yes, those Wyeth children, including Andrew Wyeth. After 10 years study and work with N.C. Wyeth, Hurd and his wife, N.C.'s daughter Henriette, returned to New Mexico and purchased a home in the Hondo River Valley west of Roswell. It was Peter Hurd who introduced the use of egg tempera to the Wyeths, and N.C. and his son Andrew both frequently used it. Hurd was not limited to egg tempera, however. He was skilled in oils, in watercolor, in lithography, and charcoal as well. He favored egg tempera for its ability to embody the arid New Mexican landscape, and he created his own pigments using red ochre, iron ore, azurite, and other local natural materials. In fact, this connection with the land also expressed itself in his conservationist practices used on his own lands, like native plant restoration, tree planting, and terracing. We are really fortunate to have one of his egg tempera works representing him at MAG. I'm gonna click this away so you can get another look. Here's some views really recognizable of the view from Hurd's home, which is still an art museum and art colony retreat run by Hurd's own son in the area. And I've got this awesome view of the artist at work in the landscape, which you don't always find. Really exciting. Come on then, here we go. Oh dear, all right. Doing fine, 2 more works, hang in there. Our travels take us now back home with Marsden Hartley, back home to Maine. Hartley was born in Lewiston, Maine, but his family moved away to Cleveland, Ohio in 1892 when Hartley was still a teenager. Art training in Cleveland and then in New York City allowed him to return to Maine briefly in 1908, but then he spent many years living in Europe, particularly in Germany, and that's where some of his most famous works are from. He also worked across various areas of the United States, but declared his intent to become the painter of Maine and moved back home to Maine in 1937, and painted a variety of spiritually, personally significant images of the inland deep woods, the mountain peaks, and the rocky coastlines of Maine. This work in our collection is a close-up study of a waterfall at Morse Pond, which is off a tributary of the Kennebec River. It captures stunning colors of late autumn in this heavy brushwork and simplicity to the point of abstraction. Morse Pond became part of a 40-acre state preserve in 2015. It's connected by a hiking path to nearby Reed State Park, but is still inaccessible to motor vehicles today. The deep woods appearance is somewhat misleading because the pond is really located almost someplace like this, very, very close on the eastern edge of Georgetown Island, right off the coast of Maine. The spot has absolutely remained virtually unchanged here. The photo here was taken in 2016. It was the most recent photo I could find. And the stair-step effect that Hartley kind of emphasized here in his view is very much in evidence in this, as is the colors that we are fortunate to have in Rochester too at the right time of year. The last artwork we'll look at here today is the one that really inspired this topic for me to begin with. It is My Hills of Home by Anna Mary Robertson Moses, who became known as Grandma Moses for her taking up a brush and palette at age 76 to begin a second career, one might say a third or fourth career, as a painter, which she maintained shortly up until before her death at age 101. My Hills of Home is featured in the mini exhibition of women artists at MAG that was put up in celebration of the 100th anniversary of women's suffrage. That opened just shortly before we had to close MAG's doors to all stay at home ourselves. This painting and our home situation got me thinking, what is home? Where is home? Is it a place? Is it a time? Is it where we are now? Or where we used to be? Is it all of these things? Like Marston Hartley, Grandma Moses returned home through her art, but not necessarily by physically relocating there. The places she depicts are real. Her childhood home on a farm outside of Greenwich, New York, which is just 14 miles east of Saratoga Springs. Her early homes as wife and mother on farms near Staunton and Mount Airy, Virginia, and then in Eagle Bridge, New York, about 8 miles south of her birthplace, close to Hoosick Falls, New York, which I show here on the map, are all places that are real, but also places and times from her memories, which were embellished by scenes from books and popular Currier and Ives prints. In her memory and in her artworks, these places remain unchanged by time. They remain unchanged in art in a way that they cannot and do not remain unchanged in real life. Although there are some things about them that are unchanged, as you can see by some of these views. And here is the farm where she lived out the remainder of her life near Hoosick Falls. So in many of the artworks we've explored today, the artists allowed us a glimpse of their vision of home. We hope that in this time of our staying home, you've enjoyed this little virtual travelogue style visit back home to MAG, and we look forward to welcoming you back in person in the near future. I will hand it back over to Bella at this point.
Thank you, Sydney, for that fabulous lecture. You took us on quite the journey there. First, I'm just going to review the answers to our 3 poll questions that we sent you during the webinar. The first question that we asked you all, what is the title of another Claude Monet painting in Mag's collection? The correct answer was A, The Rocks at Pourville, Low Tide.
Indeed.
And then our second question that we asked you was, where was Winslow Homer's studio located? The correct answer to that question is Maine. I believe, did you say he lived in Maine? He lived in Maine, so that's where his studio.
He did live in Maine, and that was where his studio was located. Yes, indeed.
Fabulous. And then our third question, which most of us got right, which other artist in Mag's collection is well known for their association with New Mexico? The correct answer to that was Georgia O'Keeffe.
Yes, indeed.
So
she spent a lot of time up at Santa Fe, so there's a place to travel to.
It's a nice place. I bet it's warmer there than it is here currently.
It might be, it might not.
All right, so if anybody has any questions for Sydney, feel free to share them through the Q&A. You can also send us any questions you have after we end our webinar today. Thank you all for joining us and for supporting us through your membership. You guys are so important to us, and we're so happy to be able to connect with you guys, even if it's just virtual. We will be sending out that survey about your experience today by email, so please look out for that. Your feedback is so important to us and really helps us plan for other events moving forward. And we will also be sharing a recording of today's webinar for our members who are unable to join us, or if you want to watch it again and share it with your friends, you'll be able to do that, and there will be captioning provided for that today. And I think that's all I have to share. So I think we are all set. I'm just looking through the Q&A now.
Will the Special Women's Exhibition be extended once we reopen? I hope so. It was certainly intended to be up for the entire year of 2020. So with any luck, we will be open by the fall, and we would be able to have those works still up. So I think that is absolutely a hoped for intention. Yes, I do. Oh, thank you very much. Thank you for the compliments, and I'm glad to know that I covered it. It was a quick dip, but information about many of these artworks can be found more in depth on our website and through Mag Explore. And hopefully it makes you look and think about them a little bit differently next time you see them in person.
All right, thanks everyone for joining. I think we are going to end the webinar, and we hope you have a wonderful afternoon.
Bye, everyone.